Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for that great introduction. It's great to be here with you today. It's an honor to be here with you. And I look forward to talking about some of my experiences around the world related to plastic. And I want to start with that. And I've had a lot of travels. And as a part of that, I meet people working in waste all over the world. And I think it's really important to recognize them. They are often not recognized. You know, many people just want to get their waste as far away as possible, but there's people that manage and deal with that. And it's really important, I think, to honor them and the work that they do. And also other folks that I've had the pleasure of being able to work with a team of all women sailing across the Atlantic and also promoting women in underrepresented disciplines and STEM. And even sometimes my family gets involved. So in terms of the scale of this issue and context, this is from a Science magazine issue that plastic pollution made the cover of 20 years ago. This wasn't even a scientific discipline, and then it made the cover of Science last year. It's a pressing issue, even with some of the interventions and changes that we've made since 2015. We need to be more aggressive. So this paper and also a parallel study that was in this same magazine showed that if we don't get more aggressive with our actions, we are going to continue to see increasing quantities of plastic enter our environment. This is 23 to 53 million metric tons entering aquatic systems every year if we don't take more action, and this is by 2030. So what kind of action do we need to take? Well, this is a whole intervention framework where you can look at reduction of use of the material, thinking about alternative materials to use, different product design. How can we get products to people but not produce waste in the first place? And then managing those materials. And then, of course, there is some last chance capture. And this is we want to reduce the input of plastic into the ocean to zero. But there's one component that's important here. If we are doing that last chance capture, it's an amazing opportunity to collect data to inform all of those other more upstream interventions. And one of those ways to collect data is to work together on that. This is not putting the burden on all of us as citizens, but we have developed 10 years ago this free and open tool. It's called Marine Debris Tracker for short. We've had 5 million reports over that span of time. But the amazing part is that it's very simple. You report litter wherever you see it around the world, but it can help us design interventions. So if you think about when you find something on the ground, identifying what is it and identifying it pretty specifically so that it can provide hints as to how did it get there. And then third, we can come together and sort of have discussions on what we can do about it. This is collective, it's collaborative. You can bring in multiple stakeholders. And I'm going to give more examples of this as I continue through. But one thing about the platform of Debris Tracker, as I said, it's free, but it's also completely open with the data. That means that we all own the data together, and also nobody really owns the data. So no matter if even you're a user of the app or not, you have access to this global data set to look at what people have been reporting and finding in the environment all over the world. I think open data is really important so that everyone can, nothing is hidden for anyone and everyone can participate in addressing this issue. And so in terms of kind of looking at this issue globally, I started traveling a lot for the US State Department and attending meetings where they were talking about the circular economy. So the title of this was sort of the tale of plastic cities and the circular economy. And I know that today's session intertwines all of those issues. And so being an environmental engineer and my roots in environmental engineering, we work in cities and communities in these urban systems. And I sort of wondered as I'm traveling and presenting and people are saying, okay, great, now we know this is an issue. What should we do about it? Well, first of all, you have the expertise in your community. You know what people would like to do, your context, you are the expert. However, let's think about what kind of data we could collect to inform that decision making, and what does the circular economy mean at the city level. And so as a part of that, We're looking at doing things like information sharing between communities, helping with data analytics, doing some of that data crunching together, empowering folks with this data, empowering decision makers to be able to use this data and make change, systems change within their communities. And that's, again, one community at a time, how you can change the world in that sense. So a few examples of this, I want to talk a little bit about the Sea to Source expedition with National Geographic. I co-led with Heather Coldaway. And this was along the Ganges River in both India and Bangladesh in 2019. We had people from 5 different countries absolutely embedded in the local communities, being led in Bangladesh and India by folks from those countries. We traveled over 2,000 kilometers all the way from Bola, Bangladesh into the Himalayas, Harshal, India, and collecting data and working with collaborative community partners the entire time. And I wanted to talk about what we found in the environment. So we also sampled had teams that sampled microplastics in the river and microplastics in the air. And so all kinds of environmental components, as well as sort of what's happening in the community and what's ending up on the ground, what's for sale, what do people have to buy in terms of if they want. And you can see here one of the shops, we found a lot of tobacco sachets, so those smallest little packets, as well as film plastic on the ground. And that's what people have most access to. In some places we went, there were policies banning plastic bags, for example, or other products. And those bans were really hard to actually implement. And I'll talk more in the next slide about that. But we were also looking at alternative materials. You can see plastic wasn't around for very long in some of these places. People could say, I remember as a kid, I didn't have all this plastic, and now it's all here. And this is kind of what we're using, and we don't really know how to manage that material. Economics also play a big role, not just along the Ganges, but everywhere. The plastic items plastic packaging that items come in is often very inexpensive. You can get small quantities, and women especially in these communities were reporting that this was one way that they felt like they didn't really have a choice of how to get their products and materials, and that economics really drove this, as well as the lack of alternatives, or alternatives being more expensive. So even if a ban was in place, people were still wanting to utilize those plastic materials. And so I want to expand this. This Circularity Assessment Protocol, or CAP for short, has also been conducted in collaboration for a project called Urban Ocean. So this is 5 different cities in 5 countries. You can see by the numbers, a lot of data collected here as well. And especially I want to focus on those 128 interviews. So we do semi-structured interviews with community members and stakeholders who really can provide data and their input and perspective on this issue. But we also collect data collaboratively with a local implementation partner. And so if you want to see these full reports, there's tons of data in each one. All 5 cities are posted at this website. And so you can get access to those. And finally, I want to sort of talk about that access to alternatives, as well as who needs to be at the table. So sort of I've been talking about what we can do and maybe some of our individual actions, using the app and reporting, but who else needs to be in this discussion? It's not just, us as individuals trying to change or take action. And this graphic shows that. So what we do is look at input of plastic into the community. That's one of the spokes of the CAP, and what products are for sale, how they're packaged, how that packaging is designed, who manufactures them, where they're manufactured, and what are the parent companies. And so with that information, this graph can kind of show you how far away some of the parent companies are and how local or not the manufacturers are. And this then talks about sort of who needs to be at that table. And if you think about circularity, you want things to be as close as possible for that. And so this also informs who is already on track with becoming more, or has maybe more opportunity to become more circular, and who else needs to be at that table to have those discussions. So these are just some quotes from some of the community members within the project. And also I think it's important to recognize the community characteristics and context and culture. So here's what it looks like for waste collection, but all over in different cities. And so you collect, capture, and contain, but it's also very different depending upon your own context. And that is a key to working with or to communities being able to make change within their community. So this is another way to look at some of the leakage data. So this is kind of what's ending up on the ground. So this is a histogram of all of the cities and their litter density on the ground. And then the front red part is just one city sort of litter fingerprint within the system. So you can kind of compare again across cities and talk about this data. And then of course, break it down into what are these items, what are the categories, where are they coming from, have that conversation, those 3 guiding questions. Then, what would we want to collectively do about this? And so I have one last project I want to talk about. And this took methods from the Ganges project and some of those other projects where we were working with trained partners, researchers, and brings it out to the community. So this is community-based data collection for the Mississippi River Plastic Pollution Initiative, which is a partnership of the Mayors, Cities, and Towns Initiative, the UNEP North America, National Geographic, and us at the University of Georgia. So community members surveyed 111 kilometers. It's equal to over 20,000 football fields. So we designed a randomized transect method that they could follow. It's the method we use for CAP, but community members could follow this method. And they collected over 75,000 items in just 3 weeks alone and removed over a grizzly bear's worth of that litter. And the most common items that were found were cigarette butts, food wrappers, and plastic bottles. Interestingly enough, different items actually end up in the water, items that can move easily, get transported in there. So you're looking at like foam fragments and foam cups, and then bottles and cans do float if they have air in them. So that was interesting to compare that data. The 3 pilot cities that participated were Baton Rouge, Louisiana, St. Louis, Missouri, and St. Paul, Minnesota. And so we had data for each one of those, and those varied across. Just like I was showing you that histogram of changes across those 5 different urban ocean cities, you can see that there are differences between these cities. And this full report is at unep.org/Mississippi. But I wanted to just sort of illustrate how this data is available then to the cities. So you can see litter densities then across the map. And this average litter density for Baton Rouge was equal to about finding 61 items per length of city block. And these are litter aggregation pathways. So that quantity of litter is not everywhere, but it's in those pathways. If you can imagine walking along a city block, that's on average of where we sampled. And so that's important for us to talk about. So what we do is really want communities to be able to have this data, to have those conversations, even at the neighborhood level, because you can see densities varied across the city, and bring in students, bring in private industry, bring in government, and all kinds of NGOs and other advocates need to be having those discussions together on what they want the next steps to be. What does that data really mean? And I think this is really illustrated by this workshop we held for the CAP that we had in Metro Manila. And as you can see here, there were 4 problem narratives identified. And this was really where all of this quantitative and some qualitative data came in, and this was discussed. And so you can see that economics were an issue, behavior change is an issue there. And so these problem narratives, then we ask people to re-envision, what would you like to see? And I love these words: inclusivity, the bringing people together, this participatory, intuitive infrastructure. This all came from the community. And of course, there's all kinds of, practical things that can fit under these categories, but really kind of re-envisioning what they see their community being as they move forward, and getting all the stakeholders that need to be there to have those conversations. And so I just want to say there's a huge opportunity to take data, to talk about everyone who needs to be there to make this change, and use that to build a systems change. Thank you so much.